Hello, and welcome back to our study. How are you on letter writing? Are you a letter writer? I understand there's still a few of them around, but I'm afraid letter writing has become somewhat of a lost art. Maybe if you count emails or text messages, if those count, then maybe you have a little resurgence of letter writing. But I'm not so sure that they count. There's just something about a good letter that captures a relationship. And of course, it's the telephone that really, put us the skids on letter writing. Because with the telephone conversation, not only do you have the words, like with the letter, but you also have the inflection of the voice and the back and forth of conversation. And if the telephone wasn't enough, now you have Skype and video conferencing where you can actually see the other person and see the look on their face when they hear things. But letters still have a sense of wonder about them. A good letter particularly. They're a piece of history. They're a snapshot of a relationship. They retain this very personal nature, this very intimate nature. And in the days of Scripture, they were the most intimate way you could write. You could do anything, converse anything, unless you were together. Revelation is a letter. It is a personal letter. And that's an important thing to remember as we get into the writing. We're not going to spend a lot of time with chapters 2 and 3. They are the personal notes from the writer to these churches. If you want to know more of the details and to dig deeper into this, I strongly recommend Dr. Richard Oster's book, 7 Congregations in a Roman Crucible. He will take you deep into these 7 churches. But I do want to spend a little bit of time here so that you can soak in the close relationship that Jesus has with these congregations. Because remember, he is the one that is walking among the 7 candlesticks. This is his letter. And like we said, it's very personal in his relationship with these churches. These churches sit in Asia Minor. It's a region about 2,500 miles northeast of Israel. The western extreme of Asia, it kind of bulges out into the Aegean Sea. On the west and the Mediterranean Sea in the south. Across the sea, going to the west, is Greece and Macedonia. Below it is Syria, and below that, Galilee and Palestine. The church had fared well in this area during the first half century of its existence. And there's several congregations in the area. And we know a lot about these congregations because there's been a wealth of archaeological finds and a rich source of information there for us. And so Revelation is written to these 7 churches. The first one is Ephesus. Ephesus is the chief city of the region. It's where all the mail routes started, and so maybe that makes it fitting that that's where Revelation starts. And it's the provincial seat of most power. It had special status in the worship of the emperor, but the big deity in town was Artemis. Ephesus is Artemis's city, and there's lots of references to it. And the temple of Artemis and the worship of Artemis is just a huge factor in the city. And so the fear here that is expressed in the letter is the church assimilating into that and molding into that and melting into that. Because every day they're surrounded by this pagan idolatry. And every day they're being coerced into blending in with the local worship. Is Jesus really Lord? Well, that was tested every day when you lived in Ephesus. And evidently some of them were waning, falling back against the pressure from the synagogue of Satan. And so, in the letter, Jesus encourages them to revive their first love. You can turn over to Acts and read how the church at Ephesus started out with people bringing out all their books of witchcraft and the occult and burning them in the street. And they were pumped up. They were on fire. And Jesus encourages them to reach back and to revive that. To one degree or another, that is the issue with all the congregations that the book of Revelation is written to. As they prepare for a future which is going to struggle mightily with Roman persecution, would they remain holy? Would they stand against the brunt of social and political pressure to conform? Or would they shrink back into the background and blend in with the communities around them and lose their identity and lose their commitment to Jesus? That's the question. And here with Ephesus, in this very first little personal note, it's brought out there. The second city that's listed is Smyrna. Smyrna is a beautiful city, 5 miles to the north of Ephesus. And it was a city, too, that was flooded with religion. Pagan deities are everywhere. There's lots of sacrifices going on in little temples. There's a monument to Tiberius, the Roman emperor here. They won a contest to have it. And at one time, Smyrna was the center of emperor worship. And so it was perilous to be a Christian there. Anytime something bad happened in the city, who's to blame? Well, it has to be those people not making their sacrifices to Tiberius. It has to be those people who are not doing their part in the pagan temples. They must be the ones that are to blame. So it was tough to be a Christian in the city of Smyrna. The Revelator says in verse 8, "To the angel in the church in Smyrna, these are the words of him who is the first and last, who died and came to life again. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you a crown of life." The writer says it's tough, and it's going to get more difficult. But stay faithful. Don't shrink back into the world around you. Keep your distinctive identity. The next church that's listed is Pergamum. Pergamum set up on a hill like a big throne. It was the hill and the throne from which the Rome ruled the region, where they could watch over the region. And there stood a monument to Augustus, a temple to the great emperor Augustus. So who rules? Pergamum was a visual reminder in Asia Minor that Rome ruled. Rome was in charge, or at least it appeared to be so. But the Revelator says, no, it is he, the Revelator, who has the sword. It is he, Jesus, who is the real civil power. It is he who gives the white stone that acquits the accused. He's the one that rules, really. Things may not appear that way, but that's the truth of the matter. That's the point to the church at Pergamum. And then there's Thyatira, the garrison town. Thyatira was a gateway to a lot of important places in the area. But it didn't have any real natural defenses, and so it had to be guarded by soldiers. And so it was that there's a garrison there of soldiers all the time. It's a military town. It's also a seat for a lot of trade guilds, all of which were dedicated to one pagan deity or another. And in order to be involved in any type of business, you had to pay the due homage and sacrifices to the deity tied to it. That was the way life worked in Thyatira. Many years later, Tertullian would write to the church at Thyatira and take them to task for their statement, "A man must live." In other words, why are you doing this? Don't you know it's wrong? Well, a man's got to live. A man's got to do what it takes to feed his family. A man's got to do what it takes. A man's got to live. And Tertullian took them to task for that attitude, that a man's got to be faithful. And so the writer calls for them to have feet of bronze, to stand strong. Don't give in to that. In Thyatira, the garrison town. Then there's Sardis, the next city on the list. Set 1,500 feet up a mountainside with only one steep road to access it. Croesus, the king, became rich because he would loot Europe or Persia, whichever one was the occasion, and then he'd run back to this mountain fortress. No matter how big the army, they could only come up the road just a few at a time, so no one could get to him. Or so it would seem, because the Persians did, and later on the Greeks did too. Now, the impregnable defense of Sardis, it was only illusion. And in war, it was a fortress. But in peace, in peaceful times, it was just too far out of the way. The one group of people that really liked it, though, were robbers, because they could loot and steal and run back to Sardis. And so Sardis became a symbol of pretense, promise. It just never quite materialized. And that's why the writer can write, "These are the words of him who holds the seven spirits of God and the seven stars. I know your deeds, that you have a reputation of being alive, but you are dead. Wake up, strengthen what remains and is about to die, for I have not found your deeds complete in the sight of my God. Remember, therefore, what you received and heard. Obey it and repent. But if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know what time I will come to you." We mentioned that the Persians managed to get up the road and take the city, and the Greeks did too. They both did the same way. It was an impregnable defense as long as the guard is awake. But if he's asleep, which is what happened with the Persians and the Greeks, then the door is open. It's fitting that the writer would say to the church at Sardis, you got to be awake. Wake up. Don't go to sleep on us. Philadelphia. Philadelphia called the Little Athens because it had all kinds of temples to all kinds of gods. But the city was rebuilt often because it sat evidently right on an earthquake fault. And earthquakes were always scrambling the temples of the city and sending people scurrying to safety. That's why the Revelator can say down in verse 11, "I'm coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. Him who overcomes, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will he leave it. I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which is coming down out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on him my new name." Don't have to run out of this city. It's going to stand firm. The church at Philadelphia was under persecution. Jews that were somehow tied to the synagogue of Satan were the tormentors at this time. But Jesus says he knows who his people are, and it's he, not the Jews of the city, it's he who holds the key of David. That's an important reminder, particularly to Jewish Christians. That would have been very helpful, very comforting. Laodicea, the last of the seven churches. Wealthy, rich Laodicea. The city is so wealthy that one time they had an earthquake and it devastated big parts of the city. Rome offered aid, and Laodicea turned it down. They knew Roman aid would come with strings attached, so they just turned it down. They said, "That's all right. We got this. We are rich and we don't need anything." They had a lot of fine clothing in Laodicea. There's a special wool that's produced in the area, and so that helped out things. It's also an area where different water systems come together. And some of the water is cool and some of it's warmer, and so in Laodicea you had a version of hot and cold running water, so to speak. Yeah, the Laodiceans could say, we're rich, and we don't need anything. Jesus tells them, there's things that you need, Laodicea. There's things that you got to have. So you can see from the details of these little short letters to these 7 churches that these are very personal ties.